South Dakota Territory, spring of 1879. The wind pushed low through the cottonwoods along the Cheyenne River, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something fouler, desperation. Tessa Fairchild stood barefoot on cracked earth, her arms locked around her little brother Dillon, whose ribs showed clear through his shirt. He was 6, maybe closer to 5 now. Hunger did that. Her fingers trembled where they gripped his shoulders. She watched her uncle barter her away like she was no more than a sack of grain. "She's young, strong. Good teeth," her uncle said, looking to the trader with a hollow grin. "You get the girl, I get your food." The trader, a grizzled man with yellowed eyes and a weather-beaten coat, scratched his chin. "1 sack of flour, half a side of venison. That is all." "Done," her uncle said too fast. He did not look back at her. She had seen the signs coming for days, the way he stopped giving her and Dillon even crusts of bread, the way he looked at her like a problem to solve. Tessa swallowed hard, stepping in front of her brother. "You cannot do this." "I already have," her uncle said. "You want Dillon to starve?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her brother tightened his arms around her legs. The trader threw a burlap sack on the ground and motioned for her to follow. That was when the Lakota warrior came. He rode in quiet, his horse silent beneath him, braided hair trailing down his back, a red cloth tied around his arm. He was young, but his presence was hard. He had a scar across one cheek and eyes that did not blink unless they had to. He dismounted without a word. The trader narrowed his eyes. "This is my business." The warrior stepped between Tessa and the man. "Your business ends here." The trader reached for the pistol at his hip. The warrior moved like a drawn arrow, swift, silent, sharp. His hand knocked the pistol aside and sent the man reeling with a punch that cracked like firewood splitting. The trader hit the ground hard. Blood pooled from his nose. Tessa did not move. Neither did Dillon. The warrior turned and looked at her. "You are not property," he said. Her voice caught in her throat. "He sold me for food." "I know," he said. "I was watching." He turned to her uncle. "And you? You gave her away like garbage." Her uncle raised both hands, backing away. "I did what I had to. Times are hard." The warrior looked at him but said nothing. Then he stepped to Tessa and knelt to meet Dillon's eyes. "Do you have any family left?" he asked. Dillon looked to Tessa. She shook her head. "No, just us." The warrior stood. "Then come with me." Tessa hesitated. She had nowhere else to go. But trust was not something she gave easy anymore. "Why would you help us?" He looked at her then, really looked. "Because someone should." He led them away from the river, his horse walking slow beside them. He gave Dillon a strip of dried meat from his pouch, and the boy ate with both hands, chewing fast. He did not ask for her name. Not yet. They walked until the sky turned orange. He brought them to a small camp tucked into a grove of pine, with a lean-to and a fire already burning low. "I am Natan Ashford," he said as he fed the flames. "My mother was Lakota, my father was a soldier. Neither of them lived long." "Tessa Fairchild," she said quietly. "This is Dillon." Natan nodded. "You can stay here. No one will come looking." She watched him, the way he moved, quiet but not unsure. He gave Dillon a blanket and tucked it over his shoulders before the boy fell asleep against the nearest tree. "You could have ridden on," Tessa said. "Why stop?" Natan looked into the fire. "Because I know what it is to be left behind." She sat beside the flames, arms wrapped around her legs. For a while, they did not speak. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper. She watched his face in the firelight, strong jaw, the scar that ran down one side. His eyes were dark but not cold. Not cruel. He did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. That night she did not sleep much, but she did not tremble either. She laid beside her brother, listening to the fire pop and the slow, steady breath of the man who had chased her passed away, at least for now. Morning came soft, with a haze of yellow light stretching across the hills. Natan handed her a piece of flatbread and a tin cup of warm water. Dillon was already poking through pine needles with a stick. "You will need a better pair of shoes," Natan said. Tessa looked down at her blistered feet. "I did not have time to pack. I will trade for some in the next town." She stared at him. "You are going to keep helping us?" He held her gaze. "Yes. Tessa was not sure what to do with that. No conditions. No expectations. They packed the camp and started walking again. Natan walked beside them, guiding with easy confidence. Once, Dillon stumbled and Natan lifted him up onto his horse without a word. The boy grinned like he had been carried by a hero. As the sun rose higher, Tessa found herself watching Natan more than the road. He did not talk much, but when he did, his words were careful. Honest. He asked her if she had been happy before. She told him about the farm they lost, how her parents died of fever, how her uncle had promised to take care of them. He did not pity her. He just listened. That night by the fire, Dillon slept fast. Tessa sat across from Natan, knees pulled close. "You are different from any man I have met," she said. He looked at her. "Is that good or bad?" "Good," she said. Then quieter, "It scares me." He nodded. "I understand. You could be anywhere," she said, "doing anything." "Why take in a stranger?" His voice was low. "You are not a stranger anymore." Her chest tightened. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "I do not know how to trust someone again." "You do not have to," he said. "Not all at once. Just stay. Let time do the rest." She did not answer, but she did not look away. When the moon rose high and the fire burned low, Tessa lay down beside her brother and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt something close to safe. And just before she drifted off, she let her fingers reach out across the dirt and rest beside his. She felt him curl his hand around hers. He did not say a word. He did not need to. By the time they reached the edge of the Black Hills, for days had passed beneath wide skies. The snow had melted high in the ridges, leaving the rivers swollen and fast. Tessa's feet had blistered, then healed into tougher skin, and Dillon had taken to riding ahead on Natan's horse like he'd always belonged there. Natan walked beside them, quiet as ever, but there was a steadiness to his presence that calmed her in a way she didn't have words for. That morning, a hawk circled overhead as they paused by a narrow creek. Natan crouched by the water, testing the current with the back of his hand. "We'll stay near here tonight," he said. "There's shelter further up. Used to be a hunting place for my mother's people before the miners came." Tessa knelt beside him, watching the water rush over the stones. "Will anyone be there now?" "No," he said. "They've all been pushed north. Or farther west." She traced a stick through the damp earth. "You knew this land before it changed." "I remember pieces," he said. "The rest, I learn as I return." Dillon had wandered a few yards up the creek and was stacking flat stones. Tessa watched him, then glanced at Natan. "He's never said much about before, not even when we left the farm." "He doesn't need to," Natan said. "Some things are better felt than spoken." A breeze moved through the tall grass, and Tessa stood. "I'll help gather what we need. Show me what to look for." He led her through the trees, pointing out the signs of dry pine that would catch flame, the kinds of brush that wouldn't smoke too much. His voice stayed low, measured, but there was something different about him today. Not softer he'd always carried that under the surface, but less guarded. As they moved under a canopy of spruce, she slowed. "You said your mother was Lakota. Did she raise you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Until I was 12. Then soldiers came through our village. They said we had to leave. My father tried to speak for us. They didn't listen." She stopped walking. "Did they kill him?" "No. But they broke something in him." He looked away. "He left before the winter came that year." Never saw him again. Tessa didn't speak right away. She gathered a few more sticks, then touched his arm lightly. "I'm sorry." He met her eyes. "You don't need to carry my past." I'm just not used to someone carrying mine without asking for anything." He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes held something warmer than before. When they returned to the creek, Dillon had fallen asleep on a bed of moss, one hand still curled around a stone. Natan built the fire low beneath an overhang of rock while Tessa gathered damp cloths to clean Dillon's scratched knees. Later, as dusk settled, Natan handed her a small knife. "There's a rabbit hanging near the trees. I'll show you how to dress it." She followed him without hesitation. The rabbit was strung cleanly, and he laid it across a flat stone. He guided her hands not too close, just enough for her to learn, and showed her where to cut, how to peel back the skin without tearing the meat. "I thought it would be worse," she said, wiping her hands. "It gets easier, but it never stops mattering." As they walked back to the fire, she glanced sideways at him. "You could have left me that day. You didn't even know me." "I knew enough," he said. "Enough to risk getting shot?" He gave a quiet shrug. "I've lived through worse." She didn't press him. She didn't need to. The truth in his voice was weight enough. That night, the three of them sat close to the fire, the rabbit meat cooked and shared in silence. Dillon leaned against her shoulder, already half asleep. She watched the flames flicker in Natan's eyes and felt the slow pull of something she hadn't known she could still feel. "You said this place used to be for your mother's people," she said. He nodded. "There's a trail above the ridge. Leads to old carvings. We can walk it tomorrow." She looked toward the hills, dark against the sky. "I'd like that." He added a small log to the fire, then looked at her. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." "I still am," she said. "But not of you." The fire crackled between them, and the silence felt full, not empty. When she lay down beside Dillon that night, she didn't reach for Natan's hand across the dirt, but she didn't have to. He'd already moved closer. Not touching, not pressing, just near. Enough that she could hear the steadiness of his breath, and know that it matched her own. And for the first time since her world had come undone, she let herself believe there was something ahead worth walking toward. The trail Natan had spoken of climbed steadily through a stand of juniper, the earth dry and packed firm beneath their boots. Tessa kept a hand close to Dillon's shoulder as they walked, though the boy didn't seem to need it. He moved ahead with a quiet confidence, the kind that only came from recent safety, still fragile but growing roots. Natan led them without words, his steps sure, his gaze steady on the slope ahead. Tessa watched the way his shoulders moved beneath the faded cotton of his shirt, loose but purposeful. He didn't fill silence with idle talk, and she had come to value that restraint. Words mattered more when they were used sparingly. At the crest of the ridge, the trees fell away to a flat outcrop of sandstone. Wind swept over the stone, tugging at Tessa's skirt and pulling strands of hair loose from her braid. Natan stopped, then pointed toward the cliff wall. Faint carvings ran along the rock-faced circles, animals, handprints, all worn with time but still speaking. "My mother brought me here once. The elders said this place remembered things," he said. Tessa stepped closer to the wall and ran her fingertips across the uneven surface. "What do they mean?" Some were prayers, some warnings, others just stories, left so they wouldn't be forgotten. Dillon crouched beside a carving of a bison. "Did your family make any of these?" "No," Natan said. "They were already here when my mother was a girl." Tessa turned to him. "Do you come here often?" "Not in years. I only returned after the soldiers moved their patrols east. Most don't know this trail." She glanced back at the long view behind them, the river winding below, the cottonwoods distant now. "Then why bring us?" His eyes met hers. "Because you needed a place that hadn't been broken." She felt that settle in her chest, slow and deep. They lingered there until the sun shifted overhead. Dillon gathered small pebbles and placed them in a ring near the carvings. When the wind picked up again, Natan turned toward the trees. "We'll head back. Storm coming by nightfall." Clouds had gathered by the time they reached their camp. Natan reinforced the lean-to with pine boughs while Tessa gathered their packs close and checked the seams of the oilskin. Dillon helped without being asked, holding branches while Natan tied them down with strips of rawhide. When the rain came, it was steady but not hard. They sat beneath the shelter, their backs warmed by the fire, the scent of damp earth thick in the air. Tessa watched the flames twist, then glanced toward Natan. "You said your father was a soldier. Did he speak much about the war?" "Only once," he said. "He kept a small book, wrote names in it. Men he'd ridden with. Most were dead. I think he wrote them down so he wouldn't forget their faces. Do you still have it? No. He burned it the night before he left. Said memory was a weight he couldn't carry anymore. Tessa reached for a dry cloth and wrung it in her hands. I don't remember my mother's voice. Just the way she tied her apron. The way she'd hum to herself when she made soap. Natan nodded. Some things stay in the body even when the mind forgets. Do you think that's enough? It has to be. The fire cast long shadows across their faces. Dillon had fallen asleep again, his cheek pressed against the crook of Tessa's arm. She didn't shift him, just let him rest. After a long moment, she looked to Natan. I've been thinking what comes after this. We can't keep walking forever. No, he said. There's a valley west of here. Near the Belforche. It's quiet. A mixed family lives there, French trader and his Dakota wife. They raise goats. Might take on hands. She blinked, surprised. You already asked them? I passed through last summer. The man offered once if I ever had reason to settle. You'd stay? With us? He didn't hesitate. Yes. She drew a slow breath. I've never had a say in where I go next. Not since the fever came. You do now. He reached across the fire and handed her a piece of dried apple from his pouch. She took it, her fingers brushing his. They held there a moment longer than needed. Outside, the rain softened to a mist. The fire hissed. Tessa looked down at Dillon, then back at Natan. He trusts you. I know, he said. So do I. Her voice was quiet but certain. Natan didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. He met her gaze and held it, and something passed between them, solid as earth, quiet as rain. In the stillness, she leaned forward just enough to rest her head against his shoulder. His arm lifted slowly, deliberately, and wrapped around her back. And there they stayed until the fire dimmed and the wind died down and the night folded in around them. By late April, the grass in the valley near Belforche had turned a pale green, soft with new growth. The goats bleated from their pen behind the modest sod house, and Tessa stood near the doorway, her hands dusted with flour, watching smoke curl slow from the chimney. Inside, the trader's wife Marie, quiet-eyed and steady, sifted cornmeal into a bowl, her gray streaked braid tucked beneath a scarf. Natan had gone early with the trader, Emile, to mend a fence line where runoff had loosened the posts. Dillon followed them on bare feet, his laughter rising now and again over the wind. The sound still caught Tessa off guard, like a door opening she hadn't expected to find unlocked. She turned back to the dough on the board, working it with the heel of her palm. Marie glanced over. You bake like someone who's done it with less, she said plainly. I have, Tessa replied, her tone even. Marie didn't press her. She never did. That was part of why Tessa had stayed. Later, after the midday meal, she walked down to the river with a tin pail, following the narrow trail between the cottonwoods. The water ran quick and clear, edged with last year's reeds. She crouched to fill the pail and caught her reflection in the current. The girl who blinked back looked older than the one who'd stumbled away from the trade wagon, but not broken. Just changed. Footsteps shifted behind her. She knew the sound of his stride by now. I thought you'd be back by sundown, she said, not turning. We finished early. Natan stepped beside her, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, shirt damp at the collar. Emile wanted to keep going. I said no. She dipped the pail again, deeper this time. You tell people no a lot? When I need to. She stood, water sloshing. I never learned how. He took the pail from her hand, not asking. That's not true. She raised a brow. You said no to the man who tried to buy you, he said. Even when it cost you. She pressed a palm to the small of her back. That didn't feel like courage. It felt like the last thing I had left. Sometimes that's all courage is. They walked back through the trees. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass. As they neared the fence line, Dillon waved from the goat pen, his hands sticky with sap from the branches he'd been stacking. Tessa gave a short wave, then turned toward the house, where the light inside glowed golden. Natan followed her to the porch. He set the pail down and leaned against the rail. You've settled here, he said. I'm trying. He watched her a moment before speaking. I'm thinking of building something. West of the ridge, near the stream. The land's mostly unused. Marie says the soil's good for beans. Tessa folded her arms. You mean to stay? I do. She opened her mouth, then paused. You want us there? I wouldn't build it otherwise. The words landed like something solid and real, not a promise made to soothe, but a choice already shaped and waiting. I don't know what I'd be, she said after a moment. To you. You'd be yourself. That's enough. She looked away toward the hills where the sky had begun to purple. I never thought I'd have the chance to be that again. I did. She turned back to him. Why? Because I saw the way you stood between Dillon and that man. Not many would have done it. Not hungry. Not scared. That was just instinct. He shook his head once. It was love. The wind picked up, brushing her hair against her cheek. She didn't move to fix it. I was afraid you'd leave once you saw I wasn't much use. I stayed because I saw you were more than anyone ever let you be. She stepped down from the porch and stood in front of him, close enough to see the faint line along his jaw where the scar began. She reached up, fingers barely grazing his temple. I don't have much, she said. You have more than you know, he answered. He didn't pull her in. He waited. So she crossed the space herself, arms slipping around his waist, face pressed against his chest. His breath hitched once, then steadied as he held her. Behind them, inside the house, the sound of Marie's singing drifted through the open window, low and old. In a language Tessa didn't know but felt anyway. She looked up, her voice quiet. Will you teach me the words your mother taught you? I will, he said. If you want them. I do. He rested his forehead against hers, and they stood there as the light faded, not rushed, not hurried, just together. And for the first time in her life, Tessa didn't feel like something borrowed or bartered. She felt home. 3 weeks passed beneath soft rains and sun-warmed soil. The goats fattened on the hills, wildflowers scattered in the hollows, and the scent of wet earth lingered into morning. Tessa rose before the rooster now, her hands sure in the kitchen, her thoughts quiet and full. She'd begun sewing again, not out of need but rhythm, piecing scraps into something whole. Natan finished clearing the land west of the ridge and started laying the first stones for a foundation. He never asked her to help, but she came anyway, sleeves rolled, skirts tied up, hands in the dirt. Dillon followed them with a carved stick that he called a surveying pole, counting paces and declaring borders with the gravity of a general. One afternoon, as the sun bent low and the wind stirred the grass in steady waves, Tessa stood on the rise beside the new homestead and shaded her eyes. You've built something square, she said, but I think you still mean for it to hold people who don't always fit neat. Natan set down the mallet. I didn't come here for symmetry. She glanced toward the saplings stacked by the fence line. You think this land will keep us? I think it already has. She bent and picked a flat stone, rubbed the grit from its surface. I used to think roots were dangerous. That they just made it harder when the ground gave out. He didn't answer right away. Then you know what happens when you cut a cottonwood? The roots send up new shoots. Even from ash. She smiled, faint and real. You planning on comparing me to trees often? No, he said. Just the strong ones. They worked until the light began to fade and Dillon wandered down to Marie's kitchen, lured by the promise of warm milk. Natan and Tessa stayed behind to stack the last of the stones. Dust clung to her forearms and her braid unraveled at the nape. When she stood from tying the last rope around the timber frame, she brushed her palms together and looked at the shape rising before them. You're building this for all of us. He met her gaze. I want to build it with you. She felt her breath catch, not from surprise but from the weight of knowing she wanted the same. She stepped closer, close enough to touch his chest, but didn't nod yet. What kind of life do you see here? She asked. The kind that begins slow. Days marked by harvest and snowfall. Nights by the sound of someone breathing beside you. She tilted her head. And if I say yes? He reached for her hand, folding it in his. Then I'll keep building until it's ready. And when it is, I'll ask you to come live in it with me. Not for shelter. For everything. She leaned into him, the dust on his shirt rough against her cheek, the warmth of his body steady. I want that. I want it slow and real. I want to wake up and know I'll be seen. You already are. They stayed like that until the wind cooled and the first stars blinked into the sky. Then they walked back to the house where Dillon waited, already half asleep beside the hearth, his head nestled on a folded quilt. Tessa carried him to the bed they shared, smoothing his hair with quiet fingers. Natan waited outside, not intruding. When she stepped out barefoot, her dress loose from the day's work, she found him by the fence, watching the moon over the hills. "I never thought I'd have a home again," she said. "You have one. And not just in walls." She touched his face then, her palm resting against the line of his jaw, the scar beneath his cheekbone no longer something she looked past, but part of what she loved. He turned his face into her hand and kissed her fingers, slow, deliberate. "I love you," she said, not needing to be sure of the moment anymore. "I've loved you since you gave Dillon food before you asked my name." His voice was low. "And I've loved you since you stood in front of him like you were made of stone." She kissed him, and it was not a beginning but a return to something that had been growing from the first firelit night, when her hand had found his in the dirt and held on, not knowing what would come next. They were married 2 days later in the clearing behind the trader's house, with Marie's hands resting warm on Tessa's shoulders and Emile offering a quiet blessing in French. Dillon scattered pine needles instead of flowers and insisted on standing between them the whole time. Natan carved new initials into the doorway of the house they finished together, and Tessa hung a strip of blue calico above the hearth. They planted beans and squash, and Natan built a bench beneath the cottonwood where Tessa liked to read. Dillon learned to fish with patience, and the sound of his laughter in the fields became as familiar as the wind in the grass. The house held them without ceremony, without pretense. It held mornings warmed by coffee and quiet talk, evenings marked by shared silence and the brushing of shoulders, the press of hands under the quilts. And when winter came, it came easy. They did not speak often of the lives before. Not because they feared them, but because they had been folded into something new. Something whole. Something that would last.